Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, now I completely forgot that me and Jules actually reported on this back in like January or something, because Jason Schreier revealed that Far Cry 6 and the next Assassin's Creed were coming before we knew that Assassin's Creed was Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Oh yeah.
So we always knew that Far Cry 6 was coming. I mean, what even is time these days? But whatever. But there's more details on it. So this comes from Game Reactor. Now this is a full quote saying that the last Ubisoft game scheduled for it to be released before April, unless they decide to postpone it, is set to be a Far Cry. That's the part, I guess, that we already knew. And then that continues. They don't want to ruin Ubisoft's plans by giving you all the information, but they can say with certainty that those of you who didn't like Far Cry 5's North American setting are likely to find this game more interesting when it's officially unveiled during Ubisoft Forward on July 12th. Now, I forgot what that even was. Ubisoft Forward is Ubisoft's live stream thing, because everybody's got a live stream now. It's like the old Oprah shows, which is a reference from the 90s. And so there's going to be that thing. But yeah, what do you think? I mean, we can talk about all things Far Cry, but how does it strike you, them coming back already with another one?
Yeah, like it's a bankable series for Ubisoft. There's always going to be a new Far Cry, just like there's always going to be a new Assassin's Creed. It's a very strange series to me, man. I don't know about you, but I used to love it. When Far Cry 2 and 3 came out, I was all in. I thought it was like the next big thing. And ever since then, I've enjoyed every game since. I actually thought Far Cry 5 was actually really good mechanically. That was so satisfying to play, and I had fun with it, but it's never sort of elevated to the next level since Far Cry 3 dropped. It's never hit that kind of 5-star, 4.5-star kind of level. It's always been very solid, very comforting 3.5 kind of material, at least for me. They haven't really brought anything to the table that's kind of, surprising or exciting. It's very good fast food delivered very well. And that's kind of like fine, but with Far Cry 6, we're so far into this franchise now that I want to see them kind of do something new, and I'm interested to see what this setting might be, because, for what it's worth, I actually really enjoyed the US setting in Far Cry 5. Like, I thought the environments were so kind of like lushly brought to life, and exploring that world, to me, for the first time in a long time, felt like a proper Ubisoft world that was lived in, not just a kind of place full of waymarkers and stuff. Of course, there was still a lot of that, but it felt more detailed than, for instance, Far Cry 4, which, while beautiful, didn't have the same, I guess, diversity in landscape that Far Cry 5 did, which is weird considering you would think the setting of 4 would lend itself more readily to that kind of imaginative design.
For me, with Far Cry 4, it's the Himalayan stuff. It was when you got up to the mountains and you finally had like the wingsuit and the little tiny helicopters were everywhere, and you could sort of do that like mountainside vehicle chase stuff where you're going from like vehicle to vehicle, and that was when it kind of got more dynamic. It wasn't just Far Cry 3 regurgitated. Speaking of Far Cry 3 though, that was the last time I absolutely adored one, and I did everything. I skinned everything, and I made every little pouch that was available to me, and I absolutely adore that game. But I think because I did a whole thing on this, because one of the chatty phases coming up is, what do you want to see from the next generation of consoles? And my thing was just risk-taking. I think that so many big AAA devs just doubled down on formulas this generation more than ever before. And if you talk about Far Cry, Far Cry 3 perfected that formula, the open world, the map scattering, all the different icons, the outposts, and the crazy antagonist.
Yeah.
And it was just like, they've never gotten away from that. And plus, I mean, the amount of things that they've done across the last sort of 10 years, like Blood Dragon and Far Cry Primal, and then whatever that hyper-coloured one was that came after Far Cry 5, the one where it was all pink.
Oh my god, I forgot Far Cry New Dawn even came out.
New Dawn, yeah.
Wow.
And I was just like thinking of all them just being like, man, you guys have rinsed the living hell out of this formula. It's like the same thing over and over. And even, I think it was Far Cry 5 came with the mission designer or the level creator thing, and those DLC packs where you could go to Mars and take on aliens and stuff, but it's always the same thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, that crazy antagonist thing carries across all the main installments. I thought like Joseph Seed and Pagan Min, like, as much as I love Troy Baker and Joseph Seed is memorable, they're nothing compared to Vass. And even he sort of gets squandered halfway through the story. So I think they kind of have this assumption of like there's a big formulaic expectation for what a Far Cry is. And for me, I would love them to just shake that up again. Like, I miss the old school Far Cries when you could just go on your back and go underneath a cabin and shoot some dudes from underneath and then clear out like a whole outpost way more tactically. I don't know if that's the sort of thing that you would want too, like sort of double down on the survival aspects.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny you should mention that because it's something I haven't even thought about, like the the amount of games there actually is for it. Because every single time we get a new tidbit or a new update on the next Far Cry, it almost feels like it's a little bit too soon, even though it has been quite a while by the time it comes out from Far Cry 5 to 6. Like you said, we've had New Dawn in between. We had all of the expansions and wacky DLC for Far Cry 5. And it almost feels like it's not, tit for tat, but it almost feels like Assassin's Creed during that annualization period where you obviously had the main games. You had Assassin's Creed 1, you had Assassin's Creed 2, you had Assassin's Creed 3, but then you had Brotherhood, you had Syndicate, you had everything in between there. You had all of these Revelations, you had all like the stopgap releases, and it got to the point where all of them were decent, you know what I mean? There was never really a bad game in there, like a properly bad game in there. They were all good, but I think by not allowing you to miss it, you kind of miss out on having that excitement or that kind of need to play more Far Cry. Like it's such a weird series to me because I enjoy it. Like I've been saying, I enjoy all the games, but there's not that need to play it like there is when some sequels come around. Even Assassin's Creed, now that they've taken it off, having a big thing every year or so. Like I'm looking forward to Valhalla because it's been a long time, or at least a longer time between that and Odyssey. So going into Far Cry 6. I want to see a brand new setting. I'd love for them, like you said, to go back to the survival mechanics of 2 and even kind of 3, which were more gamified and kind of more responsive. But I love that element of being dropped into this wide open, uncharted land that you have no idea how to navigate. Even like the space itself is intimidating, and trying to kind of overcome that, trying to survive, trying to get to the point where you feel powerful enough to take people on. To me, that's kind of like the formula of Far Cry that should always be repeated if there is one. Like it's not necessarily about the towers or about the enemy outposts. It's that feeling of being kind of plonked into the middle of nowhere, trying to get your bearings, trying to overcome that challenge, and then eventually kind of coming out on top. That to me, as long as you innovate around that, it's a great formula, and it's why I will always enjoy these games no matter how wacky they get.
That's something I was going to ask, is Far Cry 2 still your favourite one?
Yeah. Far Cry 2 still the best.
No, it's not. That's absolute insanity, JB. That's ridiculous, but I love you for it. Although, to be honest, the amount of people that you did a video on Far Cry 2 being the best thing ever, I think. Maybe that was a fever dream. I think you did.
I think so.
Or you were going to do it at one point. I don't know. But I think people will shout it down in the comments. Every time we mention Far Cry overall, there's always that little contingent of people that think Far Cry 2 is the best one. And it is because, like, looking back especially, that feels like the biggest risk that they took, where it's like this, you're bringing up the map and you're manually like trying to scan exactly where stuff is, and you're like scoping out, the guns can jam, like you can get malaria, and it's just like you've got to figure all this stuff out. Like I said, I don't know if they would ever go back to that, or because they did that and then pivoted into 3, which took off so much, maybe there's just no way that you can introduce those elements without it just feeling off. Like you said, there hasn't been like a truly great one in so long, but I think that's because it's so formulaic, and as much as those formulas sell, I would take something that embraced the sort of general ethos of Far Cry 2, even though I bounced off that game because it was so obtuse. I don't know, if you refine those mechanics, make it more like The Long Dark or something, make it this concentrated first-person survival thing, as opposed to this over-the-top power fantasy, which I know old school Far Cry instincts did that too, but I don't know, it's kind of interesting them seeing like what even is Far Cry at this point. Is it so bolted onto that formula, or could they do something like 2 again? Would you like them to go back to something like Far Cry 2?
Well, again, you make some really good points here, Scott, because when it goes to Far Cry 2, I feel like that was kind of in a way ahead of its time. Like that was before we had the Ubisoftification of open worlds. Like now we've got to the point where games are actively trying to get away from the formula that Ubisoft have established, everything kind of feeling a bit artificial, having a bunch of activities that are kind of meaningless, following waypoints and stuff. We're seeing games like, Ghost of Tsushima that's coming up, that's making a big point of saying there are no waypoint markers, you know what I mean? You're gonna have to use things in the world to kind of drive you there. We've got, a bunch of open world games that are trying to make their worlds more immersive. So now I do think Far Cry 2 systems of having to open up a map, having kind of these more quote-unquote realistic elements would probably be better received. Whether you can go back to that, though, is the big question. Because like you mentioned, what is Far Cry's identity at this point? I don't know. Is it just a set of mechanics? Is it, the formula of, like you said, having the crazy villain?
Wacky dude.
Having some crazy dude at the center of it. Is it taking out outposts? Is it kind of like winning influence and stuff like that? I think after, the response to Blood Dragon especially, people bloody loved that, and that was the wackiest thing ever. People obviously Yeah, exactly, man. People have a fondness for Far Cry's wacky side, but then they also love the kind of, the darkness of 3 and the darkness of 4 and stuff like that. And I feel like those warring focuses and approaches have kind of been stopping the franchise from kind of evolving for a long time, because a bunch of different fans want a bunch of different things, and it's not easy to reconcile those two styles. I think they've been quite kind of reserved about making a mainline Far Cry game be based on those wacky ideas. I know we had Primal and we had New Dawn, which was kind of post-apocalyptic, but those have very much been spin-offs. And so they try to have the cake and eat it too by having these crazier spin-offs that are more experimental, at least in their, aesthetics, and having the mainline series, which is this kind of grounded, gritty, action, heavy experience. And it's kind of been weird to see them try to balance that in tandem for so long. So I wonder, when it comes to Far Cry 6, are we going to see that continue? Are we going to see, a bit of a grittier game be complemented by wackier expansions or standalone stories? Or are we going to see something entirely new that we haven't, seen before?
I hope they do something that sort of like solidifies what Far Cry is for the next generation. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Which installment did you come in on? Are you one of the Far Cry 2 beloved people who championed that one over everything else? Did you come in with Far Cry 3? Maybe it's one of the older ones. And what do you want to see from the Far Cry series going forward? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.